Hi everyone. In the previous lectures, we have learned about configuration management and infrastructure as code and the tools used for them, right? Now let's move ahead and let's learn about virtualization and containerization. What are those? What happens? And why do we need containerization instead of virtualization, right? So, virtualization and containerization are both computing technologies that allow for the efficient use of hardware resources. Okay, virtualization creates VMs that runs on a single physical server, while containerization allow multiple applications to run on a single VM or server. Okay, so this is the main difference between them. If we will move further, so we will learn about the main differences between the main key point differences between them also. Okay. Now, on the upper hand, if you will talk about the main difference, so suppose you want to run your own VM of different OS. Okay. Now there is an underlying infrastructure of your main operating system or your main laptop or computer, right? Now on to that infrastructure, you have your own operating system, right? Now on that operating system, you want to run multiple operating system or guest OS, right? So you have those guest OS right there. Okay. Now these guest OS will have their own binary file, their own library, their own dependencies, and also they will having include of set of utilities or applications, right? Now for running this VM on your main OS, it will need some kind of software that can manage. Okay, so that's what we call it as hypervisor. Okay, so in Windows, Hyper-V is kind of hypervisor which maintains virtualization and Windows system. Okay, so if you'll talk about the definition, so virtualization is the process of partitioning a physical server into multiple virtual server. Okay, now this is done by your hypervisor. And what is hypervisor? So it's kind of software also known as virtual machine monitor that executes on a computer to manage multiple VM. Okay, so this will manage all aspect for your guest's OS on your main laptop or workstation. Okay, now so that was the virtualization. If we will move forward, what is containerization? So containerization is same like a virtualization, means it is also like a virtualization technology, but in here there is an infrastructure. Okay, now on the infrastructure you have your own operating system, and now instead of host OS you will run something called container. Okay, now container is a single package of software built using containerization technology is called a container. Okay, the container is a standalone package independent of the host operating system. Being as such, it can then execute across multiple platforms without any issue. Okay, so they don't contain any particular host operating system. They are a set of application which runs on their own. Okay, now for running these so-called containers, it also needs some kind of hypervisor, right? So in here we call something called a container engine. Okay, so if you will use a Docker, now the Docker have a Docker engine for running those container over your main operating system. Okay, now if you will talk about definition, let's move ahead. So when code is developed in a specific computing environment and transferred to a different environment, there is high possibility of the code to result in bugs and error due to missing dependencies, libraries, or any configuration setting files. Okay, so we'll talk about this later also. So containerization is the process of bundling the application code along with libraries, configuration file, and dependencies required for application to cross platform. Okay, containerization is an application packaging approach where the code is written once and capable of executing anywhere, making the application highly portable. Okay, so if you will talk about why do we need containerization, so let's take an example. Okay, now suppose if you want to deploy an application. Okay, so if you want to deploy an application, let's suppose you want to deploy a database called Redis. Okay, now in virtualization you will have an infrastructure, an operating system, an hypervisor, and then your host operating system. Okay. Now the host operating system, the ISO images are large, right? They are around 5 to 6 GB if you will talk about the latest operating system, right? Now, suppose you install your host guest operating system on your host machine. Okay. Now, suppose you want to use your Redis database, right? We will talk about dependencies. You have installed the application and running it. Suddenly, you got an error saying that, hey, this dependency or library cannot be found, right? Now, for that library or dependency, you deploy another virtual machine, right? And then you find out that another piece of dependency is required. So suppose in this you run a Redis image and port is occupied by Redis. Now on the other VM, you are running another set of configuration and you need another host OS. Okay. Now these are taking space, right? 5 GB, 5 GB, 10 GB, and also they are slow to start. Okay. Now, if you will talk about containerization, so they are small piece of code. Basically, the containerization is small piece of app. So what it will do, it will have their own binary and library dependencies, everything else in their container itself. So what you can do in containerization, you can create a container for those specific app, like for Redis, for cache, for MongoDB, and you can run them and combine them or orchestrate them. Okay, so that is the main advantage of using containerization. Okay, you don't need to set up your VM. They are just small piece of application you are going to run. They will get start in a bit and you are ready to go. Okay, now let's talk about five key advantage of containerization. So first one is portability. So container can be moved to a different environment without rebuilding the application. Okay. So suppose you package this container and you push to any repository. Now it will not get run only on Windows. So suppose if you have Docker running on Mac OS or Linux or any other flavor of Unix, so what you can do, you can just pull that application from repo and start running it. Okay. Scalability, so if you are using any orchestration technology, it will give you feature of scalability. Okay, so with using the same image you can create multiple container. Okay, now if you will talk about efficiency, so this basically the containers run completely isolated from your host operating system, unlike virtualization. Okay, they don't have any dependency on your host operating system. The only dependency is on they are, which is your container engine. Okay. Now agility, so because they are lightweighted, they can be quickly created and deployed in any environment. Okay. And if you will talk about security, so as they are many isolated environment as compared to the virtualization, so they provide complete security. Okay, so you do not need to worry about the security also. Now let's talk about some tools. So if you will talk about virtualization tool, most famous tool for Windows is Hyper-V. So this is the icon for Hyper-V. Okay. Now next one is VMware ESXi. So it is also one of the leading technology for virtualization. So VMware ESXi. Next one is having VMware Fusion. It's an also, but I think it's very kind of old now. Next one is Oracle VirtualBox. So you use this for deploying any virtual machine on your testing environment, or if you want to run any lab, so you can just install VirtualBox. So it will give you various options to customize your VM, right? Unless Microsoft Hyper-V. And next one is having Citrix 10 server. So basically you have to purchase a subscription for creating any Citrix virtual environment. Okay. Now, if you will talk about containerization tool, so there are two leading containerization tool available out there. First one is Docker, and another one is Kubernetes by Google. Okay. Now, if you will talk about the main differences between virtualization and containerization, so basically they are most asked question in the DevOps interview. So if you will talk about the first point, so as they are using ISO image and you might have also seen while starting your host OS, it takes some time, right? So they are very heavyweight, okay? While the container is lightweight, they are just megabytes of code written for app and they just start in a bit of seconds, okay? Now the virtualization is like limited performance. Whatever you set or give the resources while creating the VM, it can run up to only till that, okay? While the container is not limited to that, whatever the application is going to need, it will get run, okay? Now whatever the virtualization environment you have created, each VM will have its own VM of gigabytes of size, right? While all container will share your host OS and they will be connected via Docker engine or any kind of container engine, okay? Virtualization also called an hardware level virtualization, while the containerization is OS level virtualization, okay? So as they are heavyweight, so they take minutes to start up while the container take millisecond to start up, okay? Now these one are for host operating system, so they have their own operating system, so they will definitely require their own library dependencies of megabytes of size, right? So they allocates memory and also they require higher RAM to run it, while they don't, okay? Now they are fully isolated and basically what it is done, so they are creating their own VM, okay? So if you talk about more security, so they are considered more secure than container, but yeah, container are also secure, okay? So basically they are process level isolation. Once the process stop, so they are not being run, okay? While if the Windows or your host guest OS gets into sleep, so then it is also fully isolated because they are have their own operating system running in the background. Okay, so that was the main key differences between virtualization and containerization, and they also asks many times in the interviews. Okay, so you should be aware of that. So I am hoping you are clear with these two keywords, virtualization and containerization, because you should have a base knowledge about it if you are going in DevOps field. Okay, so I'm hoping you are clear. Now let's move ahead with another keyword. Till then, take care.